Hello, I'm Philip Stoten, and this is the Supply Chain Intelligence Podcast, a Scoop Studio production for Nexar and LTM Company. Each month, with the help of Dan Schoenfelder and a special guest, we'll be digging into the Nexar Spectra Electronic Design to Delivery Index report to see what the latest trends are and comparing those with other data and anecdotes from the companies in the supply chain. This month's guest on the Supply Chain Intelligence Podcast is Lucia, who's the Director of Global Supply Chain Solutions for Benchmark. Dan, before we get Michael on, we're seeing the same trend we saw last month, but we're seeing it with a little bit of a steeper change, particularly on the demand side. What's your view on that? And does the demand, if I look back at the December numbers or November numbers and December numbers for the two previous years, there's obviously a bit of a holiday or seasonal adjustment. Do you think this is typical, or is it a stronger demand fall than you would normally expect this time of year?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, Phil. We're looking at one thing that's unique in this month's report is that we're seeing essentially every top level category that we have, supply is up and demand is down. And I think that can be attributed to a combination of factors. Certainly seasonality is going to play a role. We see that in the 10 years of data that we have on inventory and the 10 years of data that we have on demand signals. And in December is one of the low points of most months. And that begins actually with the holiday season in November, in late November. Mm-hmm. And so without question, we're seeing that, but it's undeniable right now that there are market forces in play that are magnifying that as well too. Again, every top level category that we do track is trending in the same direction, and both on the supply and demand front, and it's tough to ignore that.
Yeah. And some of them are just standout crazy numbers. So when I look at microcontrollers, for example, although it's dropped down 18 points, it's still 305 on the demand index and like 43 on the supply index. That's just way out of where it should be, I guess.
Yeah, we remain imbalanced in portions of the supply chain. You point out microcontrollers; it's a great example of this. For those looking for a silver lining to end the year, we're at a high point as far as supply and availability. When we think about microcontrollers and what we've seen throughout the last 7 to 8 months, that should at least warm some hearts in this holiday season. But the reality is, to your point, that demand remains extremely high for some categories as well too. And because of that, it's unlikely we're going to see significant shifts in lead time in the near term. I think that we'll slowly see them start to creep down, but that's going to be something that happens in the midpoint of next year more so than in the immediate.
Yeah, it's curious. I spoke to the CEO of an EMS company in Scandinavia a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about what could be for them this ideal situation in that demand softens, supply becomes available, they get a period to catch up with their backlog, and hopefully by the time they've caught up with the backlog, the market's bouncing back again. And, it's kind of this ideal scenario, but it's a curious picture because people. I've got a sense from the EMS guys that I spoke to at Electronica, and you were there as well, that a slight softening in demand and a greater availability would be ideal for them. And they're not seeing demand kind of crashing around their ears at the moment. Is that what you were hearing when you were in Munich?
Yeah, absolutely. I think most people are holding their breath right now in the industry. I don't think that there is a lot of confidence when it comes to what individuals, depending on if they're on the manufacturing side of things, if they're on the componentry side or distribution side. Most folks don't have a great sense for what 2023 is going to look like. However, the prevailing wisdom amongst most people that I've talked to is that demand will remain consistent. But inventory is going to unfortunately going to provide some pressure still on the manufacturing sector.
Yeah, yeah. Let's bring Michael in. I want to come back to electronica a little bit later because you obviously spoke to a lot of the component guys as well. But Michael, are you holding your breath? What's your view on demand at the moment? How's that feeling at Benchmark?
I would say we're catching our breath, right?
Okay.
What Dan just mentioned with, getting a chance to tackle some of the backlog, I see it as an opportunity for that. It's a little sector dependent though, to kind of go a little more deeper into that. In some areas where perhaps we saw some of the largest increases in demand, both last year and at the beginning of this year, some might say an overdrive. That's some of the first areas where we're starting to see some softening in the demand. Other areas like aerospace remain strong, and if anything, have been getting stronger as travel becomes more abundant, and also capturing aerospace some of the defense markets that Benchmark plays in as well. So that's been strong since the Ukraine conflict started earlier this year.
And when you look back at 2022, I think a lot of EMSs will be recording a record year. Certainly growth has been good, profitability has been good, even though there's been those shortages in the supply chain. And whenever I talk to people, it's like, yeah, we were up X%, but we could have been kind of up 2X% if we'd been able to get stuff. I think throughout the year, you and I have talked during the year, but I've talked with other people during the year, and there's a sense that this very long-term order book going forward has to be treated with a little bit of with a pinch of salt. We in the past we didn't trust all the forecasts we got from our OEMs, and now we've forced them to place orders because that's the only way to get components locked in. Suddenly we trust it. Is there some pulling back in terms of those commitments that they've made?
Yeah, no, I think you summarized it well there. Going into last year, going into this year, we saw a lot of overdrive as a way to secure the components and the assemblies that they needed to fulfill the needs to their customers or whatever their strategic forecasts might have been. So yeah, I think there's generally a sense of there's been a significant increase in demand to the EMS companies in the world, and they're going to see, most of them will see very good financial results because of that. But at the same time, I think people understood pretty well as we go into 2023 and beyond, the chances of that demand softening are pretty high. So that's something that we've been looking at, and just how much they soften is the hold your breath part, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've got friends I talk to, and we have conversations of like, hey, is this type of performance sustainable? And what I would say is, yeah, there's been a record surge in demand and hardware shipments in general, and I think your performance in 2022 is going to be largely dependent on how good you were at getting your hands on parts and securing supply. As we go forward, it's going to be how well do you hold on to that demand, and how well have you as an EMS company distinguished yourself as more of a service provider as well, right?
Yeah.
You may have gained a lot of customers over the past 18 or 24 months, but like we've talked before, EMS companies are doing more today than they were in the past. They're not just your single margin product manufacturer. They're offering test services, solutions, engineering, design, and those generally tend to be higher margin areas for them. So interested to see how that plays with this going forward if the demand does pull back.
I guess a lot of the conversations in 2022 were around, how do we get stuff? How do we make sure we keep pushing this overdrive forward? As you look at 2023 and maybe demand has softened, it's still essential that you maintain those great customer relationships. How do you kind of adjust how you operate as a team?
Well, there's still problems to solve, right? So that's why customers come to me to talk with me, is they have some type of supply chain concern. And while now it might not be how do I overdrive my material and secure parts so that I can over deliver to my customer, a lot of what I am dealing with today is more localizations, restructuring of supply chains. What better time to do that than a catch your breath period? I prefer to call it a catch your breath period, right? Because you can build ahead with your existing supplier or in your existing factory, and give yourself some buffer so that you can handle a transition if you're thinking about reshoring or moving to a potentially less geopolitical risk country for your operations. This pullback in demand or oversupply of the market, depending on how you want to look at it, is going to allow you to secure the inventory to build some buffer to do that.
Yeah. Dan, when you look at it from a point of view of the component distribution and component manufacturers, do you think they're seeing some unraveling of commitment? Do you think they're seeing people coming and saying, hey, we were committed to that. We need to scale that back a bit?
That was something that was discussed at Electronica with a number of our partners. That certainly demand was magnified because of the efforts that many organizations had to go through to source components over the last 18 to 24 months. And that has led to a circumstance where over forecasting existed and unfortunately has created some bubbles in either its specific component values or in product families. So I think that will be a factor in play without question, that there are going to be some areas of over inventory as companies, a year ago were looking to shore up long-term forecasts. I know we as a company were doing the same thing. We were attempting to forecast demand out a year for some of the products and hardware that we support, and it was a very challenging circumstance to try to manage to. And I think the result has been that some component manufacturers and distributors are seeing what they thought was demand on their books that's either getting pushed further into the future or is going away entirely.
I think it does change, though, the relationship. And I think when I look back through the year, Dan, it's been challenging for the relationship between component distribution and the EMS industry. Did you feel at Electronica there was a kind of acceptance of that on both parts and a realization that there needs to be some renegotiation in that relationship, or there needs to be some development in the partnership model?
Yeah, I got a sense that there's a lot of camaraderie still in this industry. That there is not a lot of us versus them mentality that I see in the conversations that I have. So I think that most companies are, and certainly individuals are looking to find partners with whom they can solve problems, whether it's getting data to help make decisions like the EDDI, or it's working with EMS partners that are willing to be a long-term partner, not somebody that's interested in short-term gains. And so I very much walked away from Munich with the impression that there are many stakeholders throughout the industry who are interested in collectively solving problems, and staying away from more of that, again, that us versus them sort of mentality.
Yeah, Michael, when you look at it from your point of view, you obviously spend time with the customers, but you spend a lot of time talking to your vendors. Have they stepped up this year, and is there kind of a new model, if you like, going forward in terms of the closeness of the relationship with the supply side of your supply chain?
Yeah, there certainly is. But I mean, first of all, I'll mention just the customer side. I think that don't discount that there certainly are very frustrated customers out there. Not everybody was successful in getting their parts. In fact, some maybe missed their forecasts significantly. So I think this is industry wide. So expect some shakeup. A lot of customers are out there thinking, do I need to expand my supply chain? Do I need more suppliers? And I mean, we're doing this at the benchmark level as well, right? At the EMS level. But I think holistically, everybody's kind of questioning, do I have enough suppliers? Am I with the right ones? Are they really partnering with me? Are we in this together? Or is it an us versus them and we're clashing? So I do expect to see some shakeup there. But certainly having to work a lot more closely with the suppliers, particularly on the electronic component side. I am having conversations down to the inch-stone level with the franchise distributors and the OEMs, the chip manufacturers themselves that supply them, like I've never seen before. I mean, just down into the finite detail of where are we at in the manufacturing process of this wafer. And we expect that to continue for some time for some of the industries. But there's certainly a lot more togetherness working, and I think the franchise distributors are doing a good job guiding us on how to handle these conversations.
Yeah.
You can push, but you can't push too much. You don't want to be mean to somebody who can hurt you by doing nothing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a core of data that you need to make this process happen. So actually having as much real-time data or as much reliable data on what's going on in the market is hugely important to a company like Benchmark, I guess. That comes from stuff like the EDDI report, but it also comes from some level of transparency in the supply chain from the from your suppliers. Are you getting that? Has that improved during the last 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, we use a variety of inputs to our and Benchmark publishes for our customers sort of a supply chain outlook. It's something similar to the EDDI report, but we're just focused on different things. What's more valuable to me is lead times and how that's trending, and obviously that's a function of demand and supply. But you have to kind of put that out, and then pricing. What does pricing look like? Because as soon as customers hear that supply is up and demand is down, right, they're going to start asking me, hey, can you pass me along some savings? I think you're getting the part cheaper now, right? And we haven't quite seen that yet. And in fact, although pricing has maybe come down a little bit from the peak we saw earlier this year, it's still well above where it was, maybe just 4 years ago. So those pressures still continue. Lead times starting to level off now, but really just stabilize. Still a lot of them, especially on the semiconductor side, floating out there past the 52-week mark. It does require a long forecasting from customers at this point, which I think they're hesitant now to overdrive too much as we see the demand softening. But the data, the long range outlook, and the number of inputs that we have going into that has been critical, so we can advise our customers on what decisions to make.
Yeah. And Dan, what do you see in terms of changes in pricing as we see that shift in demand? Are you seeing a little bit more stabilization there, a little bit more of a return to what was considered normality?
Well, I think this is a conversation that two of us have been having over several months now, Phil, which is we never expect the industry to return exactly to where it was pre-pandemic. But what does the new normal look like? When do we expect something to settle into a state that is going to maintain some consistency for a period of time? And I think, as Michael pointed out, the pendulum of pricing power has very much been favoring the sellers of electronic components for a considerable period of time. So I think it's unlikely that that's going to continue for an excessive period of time into the future. I think in some of the pockets that we've discussed about in semiconductor products, some others, absolutely. I think that the pricing power in that equation is going to still reside on the component manufacturer side and on the distribution side. However, I think there are going to be other pockets where we see extreme over-inventoried positions throughout the channel, where there's going to be a shift over the course of the next several months, where that pricing power is going to shift to the buying side of the equation.
Last thing before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention, and it's already been mentioned, the whole issue of geopolitics, but what that means in terms of the regionality. You do have some handle on that, Dan, from the data in terms of what you're seeing. We're still talking a lot about companies like Apple shifting their supply chain, the importance of Vietnam, the importance of India, which I think is maybe a bit of a long-term thing, but perhaps more critically, Mexico seems to be doing well. What are you seeing in the data? Does that reflect that, and is the supply chain supporting that shift of EMS?
Yeah, I think the latter part of that question, I'd like to ask Michael what he thinks. But leading up to that, the data we're seeing very much aligns with your buildup in this question. Is we see India becoming a much more significant factor in our data. We see Mexico becoming a much more significant factor in our data over time as well too. There is enough activity in those two segments that our data science team is questioning me to say, do we need to dig deeper into this? Is there more to this than we're seeing right now? So these are I wouldn't classify them as anomalies in activity, but they're not far from it as far as the increases that we're seeing from those geographies. So without question, those are emerging markets that we should keep our eyes on.
Yeah. And Michael, when you look at it from a manufacturing point of view, you're obviously seeing that demand shift to those other geographies. Is the supply chain is it agile enough to move with you, or does as people try to decouple with China, do we still find most of the supply chain resides in China?
Yeah, I mean, as part of reshoring, typically you're going to want to relocate those supply chains as well. It doesn't make a lot of sense to move your end item assembly from China to Mexico or Vietnam or wherever you're going if you're worried about geopolitical risk, if a good amount of the dollar value of that BOM is still sourced from within China. Right. So if I was, for the most part, and I mean, every customer, every product's different, but I would advise you, if you're looking at moving your end item assembly or your product, you want to look at the whole supply chain and really understand where every part's coming from, and ideally set that up within a localized region. So when we set up customers in Mexico, we look at all of the build to print content on their BOM, whether that be metals or plastics, cables, and try to find solutions for them in Mexico. Now, I agree. I think Mexico's got a really bright future for it in the area of manufacturing in general, particularly electronics. This is an economy that's been heavily focused on automotive and even HVAC for a long time, for decades, probably, right? And now I think as the world kind of restructures around the go forward risk, Mexico is a bright star, and it's a good place to be. But at the same time, there's going to be growing pains. You and I were talking, right? It's very difficult right now to find significant available square footage in Mexico, and I expect that to continue for some time. A lot of those build to print suppliers, well, they've been supporting automotive, right? They're used to making 50,000 widgets a year, 100,000 widgets a year. Your customer only needs 4,000. What are you going to do? So maybe still buying from the U.S. for a while. We could do a whole episode probably on the potential of Latin America. Mexico is particularly interesting to me. Got a good future.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating. I spent a lot of time down in Guadalajara, and I think there's huge potential there. But it is that ability to grow. You've got a city with 100,000 people employed in the EMS industry, and there's only so much capacity, and it's probably 70-80% of the EMS companies there are all planning to grow in that region. So it's
they are. There's a lot of construction. I was just there a couple weeks ago. A lot of construction. The limited workforce that you described. I mean, what does that mean in the short term? Labor prices are going up, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's competing for the same talent. So the hubs themselves will have to grow population wise. The workforce will need to get better skilled to enable it. Mexico is not positioned to absorb the majority of what's coming out of China, but it is telling though. When you see what Apple's doing as they look at Vietnam and India, I got to assume they're the 800-pound gorilla. So I think a lot of other OEMs are going to follow that model and look to different geographies. And those are also very, very interesting. Vietnam has often been looked at as a kind of a next best in terms of cost. I understand the labor rates there are very competitive with China, and it's looked at as a much lower risk country for manufacturing.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. But when you look at India, India has the 1 billion plus population in its favor, so the capacity for growth there makes some sense. But I think that's a longer term bet, where I think the shift to Mexico and Vietnam is a bit quicker. I'm going to wrap up with the last question. It's the last episode of the year, so I'm going to ask for some predictions for 2023. Dan, perhaps you can go first, and we'll give Michael the last word.
We foreshadowed this earlier, but I think the pendulum of negotiation power is going to move from that seller side to the buying side of the equation throughout 2023. It'll be dramatic in some categories, and in other categories, I think it'll be less pronounced. But that's something we'll certainly see. And then one other thing that I'm very certain of is that the EDDI is going to find its way to an online version in the first quarter of this coming year. So We're making it interactive, and we'll make it into a user experience that goes beyond the PDF that we deliver on a monthly basis at this point in time. So we're really excited about what the future of this product has, and also how stakeholders in the industry can use this as a guide, but also dig deeper into other forms of business intelligence that we can provide out of our company.
Excellent. Well, we'll dig into that a little bit more in the January edition of the show, Dan. Michael, what do you think the big trends are in 2023?
Yeah, I mean, what I've been following all year is, when does the component crisis of the great component crisis of the 2020s reside, right? I think around mid-year 2023 is when we really start to see significant improvement. Right now, it's been really isolated to maybe some more of the higher performance type chips where the initial capacity investments were made. Some of the other markets that maybe don't use the latest greatest chipsets, where they're using the same foundries to produce the wafers that they were 3 years ago. Probably around mid 2023 before that situation's looking much improved. With that is going to come an even bigger drop in the EDDI report on demand and an oversupply situation, right? And that's going to affect different industries differently. So as we were talking, I think some of the industrial consumer goods will see probably the most significant pullback of where the overdrive probably was. Aerospace and medical, I think, will remain a bit resilient, just due to the fact that people are getting comfortable traveling again. 2023 is predicted to be the year that we surpass passenger air traffic than where we were in 2019. So it took us about 4 years to get there, but commercial aerospace demand will be higher than ever. And as long as there's tension in the world right now with Ukraine and potential other hotspots, defense spending will remain supportive. So that's how I see it right now. But there's a lot of uncertainty going into 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I look at it from an EMS point of view, I think those people that have taken care of their customers and have worked really hard to build those relationships, both on the supply and demand side, are the companies that are going to suffer less in 2023, because whenever there's this big ramp in terms of demand, people tend to look around and look at their relationships and say, hey, which relationships were great and really delivered and which did not. And that's when stuff gets reviewed. So all the good work you've done this year, Michael, should serve you well in 2023. And I think those relationships become even more important. Guys, thanks so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to chat. Last one of the year, as I say. Look forward to the January edition. But in the meantime, happy holidays. Take care, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Subscribe now to get these valuable insights delivered to your inbox monthly.